This is Discover USA Collapse, and today we're diving into a story that will shake the way you look at the soda stacked in your fridge right now. Imagine this, the very drinks that millions of Americans casually sip every day. At picnics, at bowl games, during family barbecues, are quietly being pulled off the shelves in Europe. Not because of taste, not because of marketing, but because tests revealed something so alarming that regulators had no choice but to act. Hidden inside those bright cans and plastic bottles, behind the fizz and the sugar, researchers have found traces of heavy metals, lead, cadmium, even arsenic in some batches, substances that the human body cannot simply flush out. They stay, they accumulate, and over time they can damage your brain, your kidneys, and your heart. Europeans drew a red line. They banned them. Meanwhile, here in the United States, those same brands are still flowing into vending machines, still promoted to children, still sold in grocery aisles next to orange juice and bottled water, as if nothing is wrong. But there is something very wrong. Think about this. Europe has some of the strictest food safety laws in the world. If their regulators, after years of scientific review, say a soda brand is too dangerous for their people, shouldn't we be asking why it's still allowed in America? Why are we the test subjects, drinking cans laced with chemicals that in some cases have no safe threshold? These aren't vague conspiracy theories. Independent labs, investigative journalists, and even lawsuits have uncovered troubling evidence. And yet, American corporations continue to push these products, hiding behind glossy advertising campaigns and billion-dollar lobbying budgets in Washington. It's profit over health, branding over science, addiction over safety. Parents hand these sodas to their kids after soccer games, not knowing that every sip may carry microscopic doses of toxins that slowly accumulate. Doctors are starting to warn about the strange rise of metabolic disorders, brittle bones, and neurological issues in teens who grew up guzzling these drinks. Scientists point to the metals as a silent driver, not the sugar alone, but contaminants that no one put on the label, because labels never tell the full truth. They'll list caffeine, carbonated water, high fructose corn syrup, natural flavors. But nowhere do you see contains lead, or may expose you to cadmium. That would kill the brand overnight. So instead, these companies bury the problem under marketing slogans, catchy jingles, and seasonal promotions. What makes this worse is the betrayal of trust. American consumers believe that if something is sold in a supermarket, it must be safe. That's the unspoken contract between people and regulators. But that contract has been broken. Europe looked at the same data and banned the sodas. America looked and shrugged. Ask yourself, why are European families protected, while American families are left exposed? Is it a difference in values? Or is it the billion-dollar lobbying machine that ensures these brands stay untouchable on our soil? Stay with us, because in this investigation, we will break down the 4 specific American soda brands that Europe banned. You know their names, you've seen their ads, and chances are you've tasted them more than once this week. We'll show you how each one got caught, the scandals behind the scenes, and what it means for your health. By the time we count down to number 1, you may never look at a can of soda the same way again. This is Discover USA Collapse, and what we're uncovering today goes far beyond sugar and bubbles. It's about corruption, hidden toxins, and a health risk that Europe refused to tolerate. But America still allows to flow straight into your glass. Number 4, Mountain Dew. This soda isn't just a drink. It's a cultural icon in the United States. Born in the 1940s in Tennessee, originally meant as a mixer for whiskey, Mountain Dew grew into one of PepsiCo's most profitable weapons in the Cola Wars. By the 1990s, it was being branded as the edgy choice, marketed to skateboarders, motocross riders, and video gamers under slogans like, "Do the Dew." It wasn't just about quenching thirst. It was about creating an identity for young Americans who wanted to feel rebellious, fast, untouchable. But here's the dark truth. While the commercials showed young men flipping bikes mid-air, the actual drink in their hands carried additives and contaminants so concerning that European regulators slammed the brakes years ago. One of the most infamous ingredients tied to Mountain Dew is brominated vegetable oil, BVO. This compound, originally developed as a flame retardant, was added to sodas to keep the citrus flavor evenly mixed instead of separating out. For decades, Americans drank it without a second thought. But by the early 2000s, scientists were sounding alarms. BVO contains bromine, and bromine doesn't just pass through your body. It can accumulate in fatty tissue, the liver, even the brain, leading to a wide range of neurological issues. Memory loss, tremors, headaches, even psychosis in extreme exposure cases. Europe banned BVO outright. Japan banned it. India banned it. Yet in the US, PepsiCo kept pumping out bottles of Mountain Dew with this chemical, until public outrage finally forced a slow, quiet phase-out. But here's the twist. Even after PepsiCo's press release in 2014 promising change, watchdog groups and independent labs still detected traces of brominated compounds in certain regional batches and imports, raising suspicions that not all facilities had been cleaned up, or that replacement ingredients carried their own risks. And BVO isn't the only skeleton in Mountain Dew's closet. Testing over the past decade revealed traces of heavy metals, including lead and cadmium, in certain citrus-flavored sodas. How do heavy metals end up in a can of soda? Sometimes through contaminated water sources used in manufacturing, sometimes through flavoring extracts tainted during farming, and sometimes through old, corroding equipment in bottling plants. Unlike caffeine or sugar, your body doesn't process these metals out. They stay. They build up in bones, in kidneys, in nervous tissue. Over years, even low levels can contribute to cognitive decline, kidney damage, and heart disease. Children are the most vulnerable, since their bodies absorb metals more readily, and their brains are still developing. Europe, following the precautionary principle, said, if companies can't guarantee these sodas are metal-free, they cannot be sold. America, by contrast, applied looser standards and let the cans keep rolling off the line. The health toll is hidden in plain sight. In Appalachia, where Mountain Dew is so popular it earned the nickname hillbilly heroin, dentists have documented an epidemic known as Mountain Dew mouth. A shocking combination of tooth decay, enamel erosion, and gum disease linked not only to the sugar and acidity, but also to additives that weaken dental structures. Pediatricians in these regions report children as young as 6 with mouths full of rotting teeth, often pulled out by the dozens. And that's just the visible damage. What you don't see are the invisible changes, hormonal disruptions, metabolic disorders, and the slow creep of heavy metals into bloodstreams. Families pass down the habit like a tradition, not realizing they are also passing down long-term health risks. Mountain Dew's defenders argue that it's just soda, that moderation makes it safe. But moderation assumes consumers know what they're getting. The problem here is deception by omission. Nowhere on the label do you see a warning about BVO, or trace heavy metals, or risks of bromine accumulation. Instead, you see bright colors, extreme sports graphics, and flavors like Voltage or Baja Blast designed to lure teens into lifelong loyalty. The irony is brutal. While Europe's youth was shielded from these risks by regulatory bans, America's youth were targeted with billion-dollar marketing campaigns. Kids who grew up playing Xbox with a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew by their side had no idea they were, essentially serving as unpaid test subjects for PepsiCo's chemical experiments. And then there's the corporate side. PepsiCo fought hard to keep Mountain Dew in circulation. Lobbyists argued against stricter FDA oversight, claiming the science on BVO was inconclusive and that heavy metal levels were within safe limits. But safe for whom? Safe for a 200-pound adult drinking 1 can per week? Or safe for a 60-pound child drinking 2 bottles a day? The reality is that most safety standards in America are set with industry profits in mind, not vulnerable populations. Europe looked at the same studies and decided that the risks weren't worth it. America decided that the profits were. So when Europe banned Mountain Dew, it wasn't just about one additive or one study. It was about a pattern of neglect, a refusal to prioritize public health over corporate gain. Mountain Dew became a symbol of that refusal. A soda that's more than sugar and caffeine. It's a glowing green emblem of America's broken regulatory system. Every Consoled is a reminder that what's considered too dangerous for European families is still considered perfectly fine for American ones. And every sip carries not just a jolt of caffeine, but a legacy of corporate greed, governmental inaction, and communities paying the price with their health. Number 3. Fanta. At first glance, Fanta seems innocent, even fun. Brightly colored bottles, fruity flavors, nostalgic ads of kids laughing under the summer sun. It's marketed as playful, harmless, a sugary treat that brings joy to families. But behind the bright orange label lies a disturbing truth. Fanta, owned by Coca-Cola, is one of the world's most recognizable sodas. Yet in Europe, it faced serious regulatory pushback because of its chemical additives, questionable sourcing, and toxicological red flags. While American consumers still happily pour it into plastic cups at birthday parties, European authorities decided it was simply too risky. The reason? A combination of artificial dyes, high benzene risk from preservatives, and traces of heavy metals that independent labs discovered in certain batches. Let's start with the dyes. Fanta Orange in the US is not the same drink as Fanta Orange in Europe.
Europeans demanded natural coloring agents, carrot and pumpkin extracts, beta-carotene.
In America, Coca-Cola relied for decades on Yellow 6 and Red 40, synthetic dyes linked in studies to hyperactivity in children, allergic reactions, and even possible carcinogenic effects in animal models. These dyes are so controversial that in the UK, Fanta bottles carry warning labels, may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. In America,
no such label. Instead, it's marketed directly to teenagers, with social media campaigns built around TikTok dances and neon aesthetics. Europe looked at the science, weighed the risks, and forced reformulation. America kept selling the dye-loaded version without hesitation. Then there's the benzene problem.
Benzene is a known carcinogen, and it can form in sodas when sodium benzoate, a preservative, interacts with ascorbic acid, vitamin C under heat and light.
Fanta, being citrus-based, was particularly vulnerable.
Back in the mid-2000s, independent tests across Europe revealed benzene levels in some soft drinks exceeding the World Health Organization's recommended limits for drinking water. For regulators, that was enough. They cracked down, investigated, and pressured companies like Coca-Cola to change formulas. But in the United States, the FDA brushed off concerns, saying the levels posed no immediate risk. Immediate? Maybe not. But benzene is a cumulative toxin. Every can, every bottle adds up, and the idea of children drinking even trace amounts of a carcinogen daily should terrify parents.
Europe said no.
America said, keep selling. And then there's the quiet scandal few talk about: heavy metals.
Watchdog organizations found lead and cadmium residues in certain orange-flavored sodas, including Fanta, likely from contaminated agricultural sources in citrus groves or from processing plants.
Cadmium is particularly dangerous because it builds up in the kidneys and can lead to brittle bones and organ failure over decades of exposure. For adults, the damage is slow and invisible until it's too late.
For children, the risks are even more severe, impairing cognitive development and lowering IQ. In Europe, such findings triggered recalls, investigations, and stricter standards. In the US, the story barely made headlines.
Instead, Fanta's marketing machine kept churning out commercials about fun flavor and bold colors. The contrast is staggering. Europeans protected by vigilance. Americans placated by jingles. What makes Fanta even more controversial is its history. Born during World War II, Fanta was literally created by Coca-Cola's German branch when Nazi Germany was cut off from importing Coca-Cola syrup.
Using whatever ingredients were available,
the company invented Fanta to keep profits flowing inside the Third Reich. That's the origin story. And while today's Fanta is far removed from its wartime roots, the brand has always carried this strange duality. Cheerful on the surface, but deeply troubling underneath. Add to that the modern revelations of chemical contamination and unsafe dyes.
And you see a pattern stretching across decades. Profit first,
safety later. Parents often buy Fanta thinking it's a lighter alternative to darker sodas like cola. But what they don't see are the risks hidden behind that orange glow. The sugar is extreme, spiking blood glucose levels and fueling America's diabetes epidemic. The dyes slip under the radar because, unlike Europe, our labels don't force the ugly truth about hyperactivity and attention problems.
The benzene risk gets dismissed as minimal, even though no level of benzene should ever be considered safe.
And the heavy metals. Barely tested, barely monitored, barely disclosed.
Every sip is a gamble. Coca-Cola insists its products meet all US safety standards.
But that statement itself is the problem. US standards are lower, weaker, easier to satisfy than European ones. Meeting the bar in America means very little when Europe looks at the same soda and says, "Not safe for our citizens." That's why you see Fanta reformulated abroad, stripped of certain dyes and chemicals, while the American version, the one kids drink after Little League games, stays as artificial and risky as ever.
Coca-Cola protects Europeans with stricter recipes because their laws demand it.
Americans,
they get the cut rate formula because our system allows it. Fanta should be fun.
it should be harmless. But when you peel back the label, it's a case study in how corporations sell one version of a product to countries that demand safety and another to those that don't. Europe banned what it considered dangerous. America doubled down on marketing, letting bright colors distract from darker truths.
And Fanta became more than a soda. It became a global symbol of corporate doublespeak,
Where family-friendly branding hides toxins, carcinogens, and chemicals that regulators overseas deemed unacceptable for human consumption. Number 2. Pepsi. Few brands in history have achieved the cultural dominance of Pepsi. It's not just a soda, it's an empire.
Pepsi has sold itself as youthful, rebellious, even revolutionary.
Locking horns with Coca-Cola in the so-called Cola Wars. From Michael Jackson dancing in Pepsi ads in the 1980s to Beyoncé and Britney Spears fronting campaigns in the 2000s.
Pepsi has always been more than a drink.
It's been an image of cool.
But here's what Pepsi never put on its billboards. That beneath the sparkle of celebrity endorsements and billion-dollar ad budgets,
Their soda was laced with ingredients and contaminants so troubling that Europe decided the risks were no longer acceptable. One of the most alarming issues revolves around 4-BCU-MEI, 4-methylimidazole, a chemical byproduct created during the caramel coloring process. This is the very compound that gives Pepsi its rich brown hue. In 2011, the state of California placed 4-MEI on its Proposition 65 list of potential carcinogens after studies linked it to cancer in lab animals.
Europe took notice.
While American regulators dragged their feet,
Europe forced manufacturers to reformulate their recipes, demanding that caramel coloring be produced with far lower levels of 4-MEI. Independent lab tests showed that Pepsi, sold in the US, often contained
significantly higher levels of this contaminant
than the European version.
Think about that. Europeans got a cleaner Pepsi because their laws demanded it, while Americans were given a dirtier version of the same soda, simply because our system allows corporations to cut corners when profits are at stake. But the problems don't stop with caramel coloring. Pepsi has also been flagged for benzene risks, similar to those in Fanta, when sodium benzoate and citric acid interact under heat and light. Independent tests across multiple countries found benzene levels above recommended safety thresholds, sparking recalls overseas.
In the US, however, the FDA claimed the risks were minimal. Once again, minimal for whom? For the billion-dollar corporation keeping production cheap, or for the child drinking can after can at a summer barbecue?
Benzene is not something you gamble with. It's a known carcinogen.
No level is truly safe. And yet Pepsi cans continue to roll off production lines in America, while Europe raised red flags and cracked down. And then comes the shadow of heavy metals. Watchdog groups in recent years have drawn attention to trace amounts of lead and cadmium in various soft drinks,
including cola-based products like Pepsi. Contamination can creep in through sugar refining, through corroded machinery, or through water sources not adequately monitored. The scary part?
These metals don't leave your body. They sit in your bones, your organs, and your blood.
Cadmium, in particular, is devastating to kidneys and bones, while lead attacks the brain, lowering IQ and cognitive ability, especially in children. Europe's approach was simple. If contaminants appear in food and beverage products at levels deemed unsafe, they get banned or reformulated. America's approach?
Delay, debate, deflect, until public pressure becomes too loud to ignore. Beyond the chemistry, there's the staggering health impact.
A standard 20-ounce bottle of Pepsi contains around 65 grams of sugar, more than double the daily limit recommended by the World Health Organization. This extreme sugar load contributes to the twin epidemics of obesity and type 2 diabetes that plague American communities. In Europe, tighter advertising rules limit how aggressively Pepsi can target children. In the US, the brand spends hundreds of millions each year ensuring Pepsi is associated with sports, pop culture, and childhood nostalgia. Kids grow up seeing Pepsi as normal, even aspirational, while the hidden health costs balloon into billions in medical debt, insulin prescriptions, and preventable hospitalizations. It's a slow-motion public health collapse, and Pepsi is cashing in on every can sold. Pepsi's defenders argue that consumers should simply drink responsibly. But how can you drink responsibly when you're denied full knowledge of what's inside?
Labels don't disclose 4-MI levels.
They don't mention benzene risks.
They don't list the heavy metals watchdogs have identified. Instead, Pepsi's marketing arm feeds consumers slogans about choice, freedom, and fun, while Europe quietly bans or reformulates the same products.
The double standard is impossible to ignore. One Pepsi for Europeans, another for Americans. One safer, one riskier.
The only difference? Which side of the Atlantic you live on. And then there's the hypocrisy. PepsiCo promotes itself as a company committed to sustainability and health-conscious reform.
They boast about reducing plastic, cutting calories,
and offering better choices. But the core product, the Pepsi millions still drink daily, remains a cocktail of sugar,
chemicals, and contaminants that Europe has flagged as unsafe. If PepsiCo can clean up its formula for Europe, why not for America?
The answer is obvious, because in America, they don't have to.
Lobbyists protect them, regulations shield them, consumers trust them, and corporations profit. So when Europe banned Pepsi in its riskier form, it wasn't a random decision. It was a statement. Public health comes before corporate spin. America's refusal to act says the opposite. Pepsi remains a symbol of everything broken in US food regulation. Glossy marketing hiding toxic truths, billion-dollar profits outweighing consumer safety,
and a government too compromised to protect its people.
Every can of Pepsi sold in America is more than a drink. It's a warning that what's banned abroad still flows freely here, and that the price of America's choice is often paid with our health. Number 1, Coca-Cola, the king of sodas, the red can recognized from New York to Nairobi, from small-town diners to Olympic stadiums. Coca-Cola is more than a brand. It's practically a religion of refreshment, a cultural export as iconic as Hollywood or McDonald's. Its logo is painted on walls in rural villages.
Its commercials have defined generations.
And its market dominance has crushed countless competitors.
But behind the polished image of polar bear mascots and family-friendly holiday ads lies a truth so dark that European regulators drew a line in the sand. Coca-Cola's recipe,
production, and contaminant risks placed it squarely in the crosshairs of consumer safety watchdogs.
And while Europe pushed back, America kept swallowing every sip. The first red flag is the very ingredient that gives Coke its signature look: caramel coloring.
Class 4, which creates 4-MAI, 4-methylimidazole, as a byproduct. In 2007, a landmark study by the National Toxicology Program linked high doses of 4-MAI to cancer in rodents. California moved quickly, placing 4-MAI on its Proposition 65 list of possible carcinogens and forcing Coke to reformulate its recipe for the California market.
Europe took similar steps, demanding lower levels of the chemical in caramel coloring. But here's the scandal. Independent testing revealed that the Coca-Cola sold in the United States still contained 4-MAI concentrations up to 4 times higher than versions sold in Europe.
In other words, Europeans were drinking a cleaner Coke, while Americans were stuck with the dirtier one.
The only explanation: Europe's stricter laws forced the company's hand, while America's weaker standards let Coke continue business as usual. But the problems don't end there.
Coca-Cola has been repeatedly linked to benzene formation when preservatives like sodium benzoate interact with citric acid in storage conditions involving heat and light.
Benzene is not some obscure molecule. It's a known human carcinogen, with no safe level of exposure. And yet, when watchdog groups raised alarms about benzene levels in Coke products, the FDA's response was to downplay the issue, claiming the amounts were within acceptable limits. Acceptable to whom? In Europe, acceptable meant none. In America, acceptable meant whatever wouldn't threaten sales.
Once again, the double standard put US consumers at risk. And then comes the most chilling revelation: heavy metals. Investigations by consumer advocacy labs and lawsuits uncovered traces of lead and cadmium in certain Coca-Cola bottling chains, likely due to contaminated sugar sources, industrial-grade caramel production, or corroded machinery. These metals don't just vanish when ingested. They accumulate in your bones, liver, kidneys, and brain.
Long-term exposure, even at tiny levels, is linked to lowered IQ, kidney disease, brittle bones, and neurological damage.
For children, who are particularly vulnerable, the consequences can be devastating. Europe enforced recalls, strict sourcing standards, and near-zero tolerance policies. America, silence, lobbying, and billions in continued sales. Coca-Cola's defenders like to talk about moderation. A can of Coke now and then won't hurt you. But moderation assumes informed choice.
Americans are not being informed.
Nowhere on the label do you see disclosures about 4-MEI, benzene risks, or trace heavy metals.
Instead, Coke floods the airwaves with jingles about happiness, nostalgia, and togetherness.
They sponsor the Olympics, they sponsor music festivals, they sponsor entire lifestyles, embedding their product so deeply in culture that to question it feels almost unpatriotic. And yet, this is the very product Europe deemed too dangerous in its standard American form. The hypocrisy is breathtaking.
Coca-Cola reformulated recipes in Europe, Japan, and other regions where regulations force them to clean up.
But in the United States, the company's birthplace and largest market, they sell the weaker, dirtier version.
Why? Because they can. Because regulators let them.
Because lobbyists protect them. Because the brand is too big to fail, too ingrained to face real accountability. It's not about science.
It's about power, and the health toll is staggering.
A single 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola carries around 39 grams of sugar, nearly 10 teaspoons, enough to spike blood glucose and trigger insulin resistance over time.
Add in the 4-MEI, the benzene risk, and potential heavy metal contamination. And what you're drinking is not just a sweet treat, but a slow-motion health bomb.
Studies link high soda consumption to obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, cardiovascular decline, and shortened lifespan. Coke is not just soda. It's one of the most efficient delivery systems of sugar and chemical additives in human history, and it's wrapped in a smiling red ribbon. Europe banned versions of Coca-Cola because of its chemical risks. America never followed.
That's the story.
It's not just about one additive or one contaminant. It's about a systemic failure, a government unwilling to protect its citizens from the world's most powerful beverage company. Coca-Cola became the symbol of that failure. A drink so iconic, so untouchable, that even when evidence piled up, regulators looked away. So next time you see a red can at a gas station or a vending machine, remember, this isn't just a soda. It's a warning label in disguise. Europe said no. America said yes.
And the cost is being paid in hospitals, in insulin prescriptions, in dental clinics, and in the long, slow erosion of public health.
Coca-Cola isn't just #1 in sales. It's #1 in the betrayal of consumer trust. A symbol of how a product banned abroad can still dominate America's shelves, all because profit speaks louder than safety. So what does all of this mean? When Europe bans sodas like Mountain Dew, Fanta, Pepsi, and Coca-Cola over chemicals, dyes, and heavy metals, they're not making random decisions.
They're protecting their people.
They're saying that no marketing campaign, no billion-dollar corporation, and no nostalgic red can is worth the long-term damage to human health. Meanwhile, here in America, the same drinks are poured at birthday parties, sold in school vending machines, and advertised during the Super Bowl as if nothing is wrong. It's a double standard, so blatant it borders on betrayal. One recipe for Europeans, another for us.
One set of protections overseas, another silence at home. Think about it.
Every sip you take might carry more than sugar and caffeine. It might carry the residue of industrial shortcuts, toxic dyes, or trace metals that never leave your body. And yet, instead of transparency, we get polar bear commercials and TikTok ads.
Instead of stricter standards, we get lobbyists writing policy.
Instead of honesty, we get slogans about happiness and freedom, while the rest of the world quietly walks away from the same products. This isn't just about soda.
It's about a broken system, one where corporations decide what's safe enough, and regulators look the other way.
It's about families who believe that if something is sold in a supermarket, it must be safe, only to discover years later that the cost was their health, their children's development, their trust.
The collapse isn't just in our food system.
It's in the very contract between consumer and state. So the question now is simple, but chilling. If Europe is protecting its people from these sodas, why aren't we being protected here in America? And more importantly, how many other foods and drinks are we still consuming every single day, not knowing what's really inside? This is Discover USA Collapse, and the story doesn't end with soda.